I believed was not God. I never thought I'd be sitting here, trying to put into words the most bizarre and terrifying experience of my life. But here I am, fingers hovering over the keyboard, my mind racing back to those days that changed everything. It all started when I got that scholarship to the prestigious university in the big city. Me, a small-town kid with big dreams and even bigger insecurities. I remember the day I arrived on campus, my second-hand suitcase in one hand and a crumpled map in the other. The towering buildings seemed to loom over me, casting long shadows that felt like they were reaching out to swallow me whole. The first few weeks were a blur of orientation sessions, awkward introductions, and trying desperately to fit in. I'd never felt so out of place in my life. Everyone else seemed to know exactly what they were doing, confidently striding across the quad in their designer clothes, chatting about summer internships and family vacations in exotic locations. And there I was, in my discount store jeans and hand-me-down sneakers, feeling like an imposter in this world of privilege and opportunity. I tried to hide my background at first. When people asked where I was from, I'd mumble something vague about a small town upstate and quickly change the subject. But it wasn't just my clothes or my accent that gave me away. It was like I was speaking a different language entirely. The cultural references, the shared experiences, the unspoken social rules, it was all foreign to me. Classes were another shock to the system. Back home, I'd always been the smart kid, the one teachers praised and classmates came to for help. Here, I was struggling to keep up. The workload was intense, and the professors seemed to expect us to know things I'd never even heard of. I spent hours in the library, poring over textbooks and frantically Googling terms I didn't understand. It was during one of these late-night study sessions that I first stumbled across that book. I remember it clearly. It was a Tuesday night, or maybe early Wednesday morning by that point. The library was almost empty, just a few other sleep-deprived students scattered around the vast reading room. I was searching for a book on economic theory when I saw it, tucked away on a bottom shelf like it was hiding. The Secret of Life, the title jumped out at me, embossed in gold on a deep blue cover. I don't know what made me pick it up. Curiosity? Desperation? Or maybe just the need for a break from the mind-numbing economics texts. Whatever it was, I found myself sliding the book off the shelf and into my lap. The moment I opened it, I felt different. It's hard to explain. It was like the words were speaking directly to me, addressing all the doubts and fears I'd been carrying around. The author wrote about finding your true purpose, about tapping into hidden potential and unlocking the secrets of the universe. It sounded crazy, but in that moment, it felt like exactly what I needed to hear. I must have sat there for hours, devouring page after page. By the time I looked up, the sky outside was starting to lighten with the first hints of dawn. My back ached from hunching over the book, and my eyes were burning with exhaustion, but I felt more alive than I had in weeks. As I was reluctantly returning the book to its shelf, a small slip of paper fell out. It was a flyer for a reading group, led by the author himself. They met weekly to discuss the book and its teachings. And the kicker? It was happening right here, in this city. I stood there for a long moment, staring at that flyer. Part of me knew it was probably just some New Age nonsense, a way for the author to make more money off gullible readers. But another part of me, the part that felt lost and alone in this big, intimidating world, saw it as a lifeline. I tucked the flyer into my pocket and headed back to my dorm room. As I walked across the quiet campus, the early morning mist swirling around my feet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Little did I know how right I was. The next few days passed in a blur of classes and assignments, but my mind kept drifting back to that book and the reading group. I found myself making excuses to go back to the library, just so I could sneak another look at those pages that had captivated me so completely. Finally, the day of the first meeting arrived. I stood outside the address on the flyer, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a small, unassuming building tucked away on a side street. Nothing about it screamed cult or danger, but I still hesitated before pushing open the door. Inside, a small group of people were already gathered. They looked normal. Students like me, a few older adults, all sitting in a circle of chairs. In the center stood a man I recognized from the author photo on the book jacket. He had a presence about him, an aura of calm confidence that immediately put me at ease. As I took a seat, the author, let's call him Dr. M, began to speak. His voice was warm and engaging, drawing us all in as he expanded on the ideas from the book. He talked about the untapped potential within each of us, about breaking free from societal constraints and finding our true selves. I found myself nodding along, hanging on every word. For the first time since coming to this city, I felt like I belonged somewhere. These people understood me in a way my classmates never could. They didn't care about my background or my clothes or my accent. They were interested in my thoughts, my experiences, my potential. As the meeting drew to a close, Dr. M announced that there would be more sessions for those who wanted to delve deeper into the teachings. Without hesitation, I signed up. Walking home that night, I felt a sense of excitement and purpose I hadn't experienced in months. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags. The way Dr. M skillfully played on our insecurities, the subtle pressure to commit more time and energy to the group, the gradual isolation from friends and family. But at the time, all I saw was a chance to belong, to understand myself and the world in a way I never had before. If only I'd known where it would lead. If only I'd walked away that first night. But I didn't. And so began my descent into a world I never could have imagined, a world that would test me in ways I never thought possible. As I sit here now, trying to make sense of it all, I can't help but wonder, how many others are out there right now, feeling lost and alone, vulnerable to the kind of manipulation I experienced? How many might be on the brink of making the same mistakes I did? I don't have all the answers. But I do have my story. And if sharing it can help even one person avoid the path I stumbled down, then maybe some good can come from this after all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how things spiraled so far out of control, you need to know what happened next. How a simple reading group turned into something much darker, much more dangerous. And how I found myself caught in the middle of it all, struggling to hold on to my sanity and my very sense of self. The weeks following that first reading group meeting passed in a blur of excitement and newfound purpose. I found myself looking forward to each session with an intensity that surprised even me. The small group became my sanctuary, a place where I felt understood and valued in a way I'd never experienced before. Our meetings were held in a cozy room at the back of a local bookstore. The smell of old books and freshly brewed coffee always greeted us as we entered, creating an atmosphere of warmth and intellectual stimulation. We'd arrange our chairs in a circle, creating an intimate space for discussion and reflection. Dr. M had a way of making each of us feel special, like we were part of something greater than ourselves. He'd often start our sessions by asking us to share any insights or experiences we'd had since the last meeting. I remember the first time I worked up the courage to speak, my voice shaky as I described a moment of clarity I'd had while meditating. "That's it," Dr. M exclaimed, his eyes lighting up with genuine enthusiasm. "You're beginning to tap into your true potential. Can you feel it?" And I could. In that moment, surrounded by encouraging nods and warm smiles, I felt a surge of confidence and belonging that was intoxicating. As the weeks went by, our discussions delved deeper into the philosophy outlined in The Secret of Life. Dr. M introduced us to concepts that seemed to challenge everything I thought I knew about the world. He spoke of hidden energies, of the power of the mind to shape reality, of ancient wisdom that had been suppressed by mainstream society. At first, some of these ideas seemed far-fetched, even ridiculous. But Dr. M had a way of presenting them that made them feel not just plausible, but profoundly true. He'd often say, "Don't just accept what I'm saying. Test it for yourself. Experience it." And so we did. We were given exercises to practice between meetings, meditation techniques, visualization exercises, even small rituals designed to align our energies with the universe. I threw myself into these practices with a fervor that bordered on obsession. I'd wake up early to meditate before classes, spend my lunch breaks visualizing my goals, and fall asleep listening to recordings of Dr. M's lectures. Looking back, I can see how this gradual immersion separated me from my normal life. My classmates started to seem shallow and unenlightened. Their concerns about grades and parties felt trivial compared to the profound truths I believed I was uncovering. I began to skip study groups, declining invitations to social events. My roommate would give me odd looks as I sat cross-legged on my bed, eyes closed, mumbling affirmations under my breath. But I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of something important, something transformative. The loneliness and insecurity that had plagued me since arriving at university began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging. Dr. M encouraged us to share the teachings with others, to spread the light, as he put it. I found myself engaging in passionate discussions with anyone who would listen, trying to convince them of the profound truths I'd discovered. Most people reacted with polite skepticism or outright dismissal, which only reinforced my belief that they weren't ready for this higher knowledge. As our group grew closer, Dr. M began to introduce more intense practices. We started with extended meditation sessions, pushing ourselves to maintain focus for hours at a time. Then came fasting rituals, designed to purify our bodies and minds. I remember the first 24-hour fast, how the hunger pangs gradually gave way to a strange, floaty sensation that Dr. M assured us was our higher consciousness emerging. The physical demands of these practices began to take their toll. I lost weight, my clothes hanging loose on my frame. Dark circles appeared under my eyes from late-night study sessions, not of my university coursework, but of the increasingly complex texts Dr. M provided us. My grades began to slip, but it hardly seemed to matter. What was a degree compared to the universal truths I was uncovering? Our group activities became more frequent and more demanding. What started as weekly meetings soon became bi-weekly, then almost daily gatherings. We were encouraged to spend more time together outside of official meetings, to support each other on our journey. Before I knew it, nearly all my free time was devoted to the group and its practices. There were moments of doubt, of course. Times when the rational part of my mind would surface, questioning the increasingly extreme nature of our activities. But these doubts were quickly squashed either by my own fervent belief or by the gentle reassurances of Dr. M and my fellow group members. It's natural to feel resistance, Dr. M would say, his voice soothing and authoritative. Your old self is fighting against the emergence of your true, higher self. Embrace the discomfort. It's a sign of growth. And so I pushed through the discomfort, the exhaustion, the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. I was committed to seeing this journey through, no matter the cost. It was around this time that Dr. M introduced the concept of energy exchanges to our group. These were one-on-one sessions with him, designed to accelerate our spiritual growth. The first time he invited me for one of these sessions, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. To be singled out like this felt like an honor, a recognition of my dedication and progress. The session took place in a small, dimly lit room at the back of the bookstore. Incense smoke hung heavy in the air, and soft, hypnotic music played in the background. Dr. M sat across from me, his eyes intense as he guided me through a series of breathing exercises and visualizations. As the session progressed, I found myself sharing things I'd never told anyone, my deepest fears, my most painful memories, my secret desires. Dr. M listened with unwavering attention, occasionally offering insights or gentle touches that seemed to release pent-up emotions. By the end of the session, I felt drained yet somehow lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Dr. M smiled warmly, assuring me that I'd made significant progress. "You're ready for the next level," he said, his voice filled with promise and a hint of something else I couldn't quite identify. Looking back, I can see how these sessions were designed to create a deep emotional dependency, to cement Dr. M's role as a guru and father figure in our lives. But at the time, all I felt was gratitude and a renewed commitment to the path he was leading us down. As our practices intensified, so did the secrecy surrounding our group. We were cautioned against sharing too much with outsiders, warned that they might misunderstand or even try to hinder our progress. This created a sense of us versus them mentality, further isolating us from the outside world. I remember one particularly intense group session where Dr. M introduced the concept of detachment from worldly ties. He spoke passionately about the need to free ourselves from the constraints of family, friends, and society in order to reach our full potential. "These connections are holding you back," he said, his eyes blazing with conviction. "They're anchors tying you to your old, limited self. To truly evolve, you must be willing to cut these ties." A part of me recoiled at this idea. Cut ties with my family? The people who had supported me, who had sacrificed so much to give me this opportunity? But as I looked around the room, seeing the nodding heads and rapt expressions of my fellow group members, I felt a pressure to conform, to prove my commitment. That night, I lay awake in my dorm room, torn between my loyalty to the group and the love for my family. I thought about the concerned voicemails from my mom that I'd been ignoring, the unanswered texts from old friends. Was this really necessary for my growth? Or was I losing something precious in pursuit of this elusive enlightenment? These doubts were pushed aside the next day as we embarked on a new, more demanding phase of our journey. Dr. M announced that we would be participating in a series of intensive purification rituals that would push us to our limits and beyond. The first of these rituals involved sleep deprivation. We were instructed to stay awake for 48 hours straight, engaging in continuous meditation and study. The experience was grueling. By the second night, I was hallucinating, seeing swirling patterns in the air and hearing whispered voices that weren't there. But there was also a strange euphoria that came with the exhaustion, a feeling of breaking through some barrier in my mind. When we finally ended the session, collapsing into exhausted heaps, Dr. M praised our dedication and resilience. "You've taken a huge step forward," he said, his words filling me with pride despite my physical discomfort. As extreme as these practices were becoming, I found myself eagerly anticipating each new challenge. The outside world faded into irrelevance as I became more and more immersed in the group's activities. My studies, once the focus of my life, now seemed like a distant memory. I barely recognized myself anymore. The shy, insecure freshman who had arrived on campus just months ago had been replaced by someone fervent, almost fanatical in their beliefs. I spoke with absolute certainty about concepts I barely understood, defended practices that would have horrified me just weeks earlier. It was during this time that Dr. M began to hint at an ultimate ritual that would cement our transformation. He was vague about the details, but the way he spoke of it filled me with both excitement and a creeping sense of dread. "Soon," he would say, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that was both captivating and unsettling, "you'll be ready to take the final step. To fully embrace your true selves and leave your old lives behind forever." As I nodded along with the others, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. But I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the promise of enlightenment, of belonging, of finally understanding the secrets of the universe. Little did I know that this ultimate ritual would be the thing to finally open my eyes to the true nature of what I'd become involved in. But that realization was still to come. For now, I was lost in a world of esoteric teachings and extreme practices, blind to the danger I was in and the damage I was doing to myself and my future. The path ahead would lead to places darker and more terrifying than I could have imagined. But in that moment, standing on the precipice of what I believed to be ultimate truth, I felt only anticipation and a burning desire to prove myself worthy of the knowledge Dr. M promised. If only I had known then what I know now. If only I had listened to that small voice of doubt. But I didn't. And so I continued down this perilous path, unaware of the trials and horrors that awaited me. As the days grew shorter and the air turned crisp with the approach of autumn, our group's activities took on a more intense, almost frantic pace. Dr. M spoke increasingly of the need to push beyond our limits and break free from the constraints of our physical selves. It was during this time that he introduced what he called purification rituals, extended periods of fasting combined with intense meditation and sleep deprivation. The first major fast was set to last for 10 days. We were allowed only water and a specially prepared cleansing tea that Dr. M provided. The fast was to be accompanied by daily group meditation sessions and solitary reflection time. As we embarked on this challenge, I felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. I'd never gone without food for more than a day before, and the prospect of 10 days seemed daunting. But I was determined to prove my commitment, to show that I was worthy of the knowledge and enlightenment Dr. M promised. The first few days were the hardest. My stomach growled constantly, and I felt weak and irritable. Headaches pounded behind my eyes, and I found it difficult to concentrate during our meditation sessions. But as the days wore on, something strange began to happen. The hunger pangs subsided, replaced by a kind of light-headed euphoria. By the 5th day, I felt as though I was floating through the world, disconnected from my physical body. Colors seemed brighter, sounds more intense. During our group sessions, I found myself slipping into trance-like states, losing track of time for hours on end. Dr. M encouraged us to embrace these sensations, to let go of our earthly tethers. He spoke of the fast as a way to purge the toxins of modern life from our systems, both physical and spiritual. In my weakened, suggestible state, his words seemed to carry even more weight than usual. As the fast progressed, I began to notice changes in the other group members as well. Some, like me, seemed to be riding a wave of euphoria, their eyes bright and unfocused. Others looked gaunt and exhausted, dark circles under their sunken eyes. One member, a usually vibrant young woman, collapsed during a meditation session and had to be carried out. This incident sent a ripple of unease through the group, but Dr. M was quick to reassure us. Her body is simply releasing deep-seated toxins, he explained smoothly. It's a sign of progress, of breaking through to a higher plane of existence. I wanted to believe him, but a small part of me couldn't shake the image of her pale, limp form being carried away. For the first time, I found myself questioning the wisdom of what we were doing. But these doubts were fleeting, easily pushed aside by the fog of hunger and exhaustion that enveloped me. As we entered the final days of the fast, Dr. M introduced a new element to our routine: sleep deprivation. We were instructed to stay awake for the last 72 hours of the fast, engaging in continuous meditation and study. The combination of prolonged fasting and lack of sleep pushed us to the very edges of our endurance. I remember sitting in our dimly lit meeting room, struggling to keep my eyes open as Dr. M lectured on the nature of reality and consciousness. The words seemed to swirl around me, taking on physical form in the air. At times, I wasn't sure if I was awake or dreaming. It was during one of these marathon sessions that I experienced what Dr. M called a breakthrough. As I sat there, swaying slightly with exhaustion, the room around me seemed to dissolve. I felt as though I was floating in a vast, empty space, filled with swirling lights and indescribable colors. A sense of profound peace washed over me, along with a feeling of connection to something greater than myself. When I came back to awareness, I found Dr. M kneeling beside me, his eyes shining with excitement. "You've touched the divine," he whispered, squeezing my shoulder. "You're ready for the next level." The experience left me shaken but exhilarated. Despite my physical discomfort, I felt as though I'd glimpsed something truly profound. This sensation, more than anything else, convinced me to push through my doubts and continue down the path Dr. M was leading us. As the fast came to an end, we were slowly reintroduced to food, starting with small amounts of fruit and vegetables. The process of eating again was almost as challenging as the fast itself. My stomach, shrunk from days without food, rebelled against even the smallest morsels. In the days that followed, as we recovered our strength, Dr. M spoke of the need to maintain our spiritual momentum. He introduced new, even more demanding practices, including extended periods of isolation and sensory deprivation. It was during one of these isolation sessions that I had my first real moment of clarity since joining the group. Locked in a small, dark room for what was supposed to be a 3-day deep meditation retreat, I found myself confronted with the reality of what I'd become. As the hours ticked by, marked only by the occasional delivery of water and that strange tea, my mind began to clear. The fog of exhaustion and malnutrition that had clouded my thinking for weeks began to lift. And in its place came a growing sense of unease. I thought about my family, who I hadn't spoken to in months. I remembered my academic goals, now all but abandoned. I recalled the friends I'd pushed away, the opportunities I'd missed. And for the first time, I allowed myself to really question what I was doing here. Was this really the path to enlightenment? Or had I been led astray by my own insecurities and the charismatic words of a man I barely knew? The doubts I'd been suppressing for so long came flooding back, stronger than ever. But even as these thoughts swirled through my mind, another part of me clung desperately to the beliefs I'd embraced. the sense of belonging, of purpose, that the group had given me was hard to let go of. And the memory of that transcendent experience during the fast still lingered, a tantalizing glimpse of something greater. As the isolation continued, I found myself swinging between moments of clarity and periods of confusion. Reality seemed to blur at the edges, and I wasn't always sure what was real and what was hallucination. Had that been Dr. M's voice I'd heard whispering encouragement, or just my own imagination? Was the faint glow I sometimes saw in the darkness a sign of spiritual awakening, or simply the product of an overstressed mind? When I was finally released from the isolation room, stumbling and blinking in the sudden light, I felt fundamentally changed. But whether that change was for better or worse, I couldn't say. The certainty I'd felt before had been replaced by a deep, gnawing uncertainty. Dr. M greeted me with his usual warm smile, praising my dedication and speaking of the great progress I'd made. But now, for the first time, I found myself looking at him with new eyes. Was that genuine care in his expression, or something more calculating? As I rejoined the group, I noticed similar changes in some of the other members. A few seemed energized and more committed than ever, speaking excitedly of visions and revelations they'd had during their own isolation periods. But others seemed subdued, their eyes haunted in a way I recognized all too well. In the days that followed, I found myself in a state of constant internal conflict. Part of me wanted to recommit to the group, to push aside my doubts and embrace the teachings that had given my life meaning. But another part, growing stronger by the day, urged me to question, to look more closely at what was really happening. This conflict came to a head during a group session where Dr. M began to hint at an upcoming ultimate ritual that would cement our transformation. As he spoke of severing all ties with our past lives, of dedicating ourselves fully to the group's mission, I felt a chill run down my spine. Looking around the room, I saw a mix of excitement and fear on the faces of my fellow group members. And in that moment, I realized that I was standing at a crossroads. The choice I made next would determine the course of my life and possibly my very survival. Little did I know that this moment of realization was just the beginning. The true test of my resolve, and the full extent of the danger I was in, was yet to come. But for the first time in months, I felt the stirrings of my old self, the part of me that questioned and sought truth. And with that awakening came both hope and fear for what lay ahead. The days following my isolation experience were a blur of confusion and conflicting emotions. I felt like I was walking through a fog, unable to distinguish reality from the hallucinations that still lingered at the edges of my consciousness. The group meetings continued, but I found myself watching from a distance, as if I were observing a play rather than participating in it. Dr. M seemed to sense my withdrawal. He began paying extra attention to me, pulling me aside for private conversations and offering reassurances. "It's normal to feel disoriented after such a profound experience," he would say, his voice soothing and hypnotic. "You're on the brink of a great breakthrough. Don't let your doubts hold you back now." A part of me wanted desperately to believe him. The thought of losing the sense of purpose and belonging I'd found in the group was terrifying. But another part, growing stronger by the day, couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. It was during one of these private sessions with Dr. M that I had my first real glimpse of the danger I was in. As he spoke about the upcoming ultimate ritual, I noticed a change in his demeanor. There was an intensity in his eyes that I'd never seen before, a hint of something that sent a chill down my spine. "You've come so far," he said, leaning in close. "You're one of our most promising members. I have special plans for you in the ritual." The way he said it, the the gleam in his eye, made me suddenly, acutely aware of how vulnerable I was. In that moment, I realized that the power dynamic between us had shifted in a way I hadn't noticed before. I mumbled some vague response and excused myself, my heart pounding. As I walked back to my dorm room, I felt as if I were seeing the world clearly for the first time in months. The campus around me seemed alien and unfamiliar, a stark reminder of how far I'd drifted from my old life. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through old messages on my phone. Texts from friends I'd ignored, voicemails from my parents that I'd never listened to. With shaking hands, I played one of the messages from my mom. Her voice, filled with worry and love, broke through the last of the mental fog I'd been living in. "Honey, we're so worried about you. Please call us. Whatever's going on, we can help. We love you." Tears streamed down my face as the reality of what I'd done, what I'd almost lost, hit me full force. In that moment, I knew I had to get out. But the thought of leaving filled me with terror. What if Dr. M was right? What if I was throwing away my only chance at true enlightenment? And more pressingly, how would the group react if I tried to leave? The next few days were a torment of indecision and fear. I went through the motions of group activities, all the while watching and listening with new awareness. I began to notice things I'd overlooked before: the way some members seemed to be favored over others, the subtle manipulations in Dr. M's speeches, the increasing isolation of our group from the outside world. My turning point came unexpectedly. I was in the university library, ostensibly doing research for the group, when I overheard a conversation at a nearby table. Two students were discussing a recent news article about cults and mind control. As I listened, my blood ran cold. The tactics they described, love bombing, sleep deprivation, induced dependency, were eerily familiar. With trembling hands, I opened a browser and began researching. The more I read, the more certain I became. The group I'd devoted months of my life to, the teachings I'd embraced as ultimate truth, bore all the hallmarks of a dangerous cult. This realization brought both clarity and a new wave of fear. I knew I had to leave, but I also knew it wouldn't be easy. The group had become my whole world. I had no close friends left on campus, and I'd pushed my family away. Where could I go? Who could I turn to? I spent the next week planning my escape in secret. I began squirreling away small amounts of money, gathering my important documents, and researching support organizations for cult survivors. All the while, I had to maintain the appearance of a devoted member, attending meetings and participating in rituals with a growing sense of dread. The hardest part was knowing that I would have to leave others behind. I'd formed close bonds with some of the other members, and the thought of abandoning them to Dr. M's manipulation was agonizing. But I knew I couldn't help them if I couldn't first help myself. As the date of the ultimate ritual drew closer, the atmosphere in the group became increasingly tense and excited. Dr. M spoke of it in grandiose terms, promising a transformation that would set us apart from the rest of humanity forever. The way some of the other members looked at him, with a mixture of adoration and fear, made me realize how close I'd come to losing myself completely. The night before I'd planned to leave, I lay awake in my dorm room, every sound making me jump. What if they somehow knew? What if they came for me before I could get away? The fear was almost paralyzing, but beneath it was a steely determination. I'd lost months of my life to this group. I wouldn't let them take my future too. In the early hours of the morning, I slipped out of my room with a backpack containing the bare essentials. The campus was quiet, a light fog adding to the surreal feeling of the moment. Each step away from the dorm felt both terrifying and liberating. I'd arranged to stay with a distant relative who lived a few hours away, someone the group didn't know about. As I waited at the bus station, constantly looking over my shoulder, I felt like a fugitive. In a way, I suppose I was. The first few days after my escape were a blur of paranoia and emotional upheaval. Every phone call, every knock at the door sent my heart racing. I kept expecting Dr. M or other group members to show up, to try to drag me back. But as the days passed without incident, I began to relax, if only slightly. My relative, though clearly concerned and a bit overwhelmed by my state, provided a safe haven for me to begin processing what I'd been through. It was there, in the quiet of a spare bedroom, that I finally allowed myself to break down completely. The tears came in waves, bringing with them a mix of relief, grief, shame, and anger. Slowly, hesitantly, I began reaching out to my old life. The first call to my parents was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Hearing their voices, a mixture of joy and worry, brought home just how much I'd put them through. "We're just glad you're safe," my mom said, her voice choked with emotion. "Whatever you need, we're here for you." Returning to campus was a daunting prospect, but one I knew I had to face eventually. I'd missed so much coursework that catching up seemed almost impossible. But to my surprise, many of my professors were understanding once I explained my situation. In vague terms, I still wasn't ready to fully disclose what I'd been through. The hardest part was facing the other students. Rumors had spread about my involvement with the group, and I could feel the stares and whispers following me across campus. Some people avoided me entirely, while others approached with a morbid curiosity that made me uncomfortable. There were moments when the temptation to return to the group was almost overwhelming. I missed the sense of purpose, the feeling of being part of something greater than myself. In my lowest moments, I would find myself doubting my decision to leave. What if I'd made a terrible mistake? But then I would remember the fear in Dr. M's eyes when he spoke of the ultimate ritual, the way my health had deteriorated under the group's practices, the relationships I'd nearly destroyed. These memories strengthened my resolve to stay away, no matter how difficult the path forward might be. Recovery was a slow, often painful process. I began seeing a therapist who specialized in helping former cult members. Those sessions were grueling, forcing me to confront the manipulation I'd experienced and my own role in perpetuating it. But they were also crucial in helping me understand what had happened and why I'd been vulnerable to it. One of the most challenging aspects of my recovery was dealing with the guilt I felt over leaving others behind. I knew there were members of the group who were as lost and vulnerable as I had been. The thought of them going through with the ultimate ritual, whatever it might entail, haunted me. After much discussion with my therapist and family, I made the difficult decision to report the group to the authorities. It was a terrifying step. I feared retaliation from Dr. M and his most devoted followers. But the thought of doing nothing, of allowing others to suffer as I had, was even more unbearable. The process of giving statements to the police and later to university officials was exhausting and often traumatic. Having to recount my experiences in detail, to relive some of the most confusing and frightening moments of my life, took a toll on my mental health. There were nights when the nightmares were so intense that I woke up screaming, convinced I was back in that dark isolation room. But there were positive moments too. A few weeks after I'd given my statement, I received a message from another former member of the group. She'd managed to leave shortly after I did, inspired in part by my disappearance. Knowing that my actions had helped someone else find the strength to escape was a powerful affirmation that I'd made the right choice. As the months passed, I slowly began to rebuild my life. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make up for lost time. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of everything I'd been through made it hard to even get out of bed. But with the support of my family, my therapist, and a few understanding friends, I kept pushing forward. I also began to reconnect with the spiritual side of myself in a healthier way. The experience with the group hadn't destroyed my belief in something greater than myself, but it had certainly complicated it. Through meditation, journaling, and long talks with a campus chaplain, I started to explore my beliefs on my own terms, free from the manipulation and pressure I'd experienced in the group. Looking back now, I can see how close I came to losing everything. My education, my relationships, my sense of self, all of it was nearly sacrificed on the altar of a false enlightenment. The road to recovery has been long and is far from over. There are still days when I struggle with trust, when the teachings of the group echo in my mind, when I question my own judgment. But there are also days of profound gratitude. Gratitude for the strength I found to leave, for the people who supported me through the darkest times, for the second chance I've been given. I know now that true growth and enlightenment don't come from following someone else's path, but from finding your own way, even when that path is difficult and uncertain. As I sit here, writing this account of my experience, I'm struck by how far I've come. The scared, confused person who stumbled out of that dorm room in the early morning hours seems like a different person entirely. And in many ways, I suppose they are. I don't know what the future holds. The investigation into the group is ongoing, and I may yet have to face Dr. M and the others in court. The thought is terrifying, but I'm no longer the vulnerable, easily manipulated person I once was. Whatever comes, I know I have the strength to face it. If there's one thing I hope people take from my story, it's this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. No matter how alluring the promises of enlightenment or belonging might be, no group or individual has all the answers. True growth comes from within, from questioning, from making mistakes and learning from them. And to anyone who might find themselves in a situation similar to mine, know this: it's never too late to leave. No matter how deep you've gone, no matter what you've done or what's been done to you, there is always a way out. It won't be easy, but you have more strength than you know. Trust in that strength. Use it. Reclaim your life. As for me, I'm taking it one day at a time. Healing. Learning. Growing. And above all, cherishing the freedom to chart my own course, to seek truth and meaning on my own terms. It's a journey without end, but for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see where it leads. The process of recovery was far from linear. There were days when I felt like I was making progress, and others when I seemed to slide back into the depths of confusion and self-doubt. The support of my family and the few friends who stood by me was invaluable during this time, but it also came with its own challenges. My parents, in particular, struggled to understand what I'd been through. Their love and support were unwavering, but I could see the pain and bewilderment in their eyes whenever I tried to explain my experiences. How could I make them understand the allure of the group's teachings, the sense of belonging I'd felt, without sounding like I was still under its influence? There were awkward family dinners where conversation would grind to a halt whenever the topic of my lost months came up. My younger sister, who had always looked up to me, now regarded me with a mixture of concern and wariness that broke my heart. Rebuilding these relationships became a central part of my recovery process, requiring patience and understanding on all sides. The friends who stuck by me were few, but their support was crucial. They provided a link to my old life, reminding me of who I had been before the group. Yet even with them, I often felt like there was an invisible barrier. They couldn't fully grasp what I'd been through, and I struggled to bridge that gap. Returning to my studies proved to be both a challenge and a lifeline. The structure and intellectual engagement of academic life helped ground me, providing a sense of normalcy and purpose. But it also brought its own set of difficulties. Concentrating on lectures and assignments was often a struggle, my mind prone to wandering back to memories of the group. There were moments in class when a professor would say something that echoed the group's teachings, sending a jolt of anxiety through me. It took time to learn to separate the legitimate philosophical and spiritual concepts from the manipulated versions I'd been indoctrinated with. The university's counseling services became a crucial part of my recovery. My therapist, a kind-faced woman with years of experience in trauma counseling, helped me navigate the complex emotions I was grappling with. In those sessions, I began to unpack the layers of manipulation I'd experienced, to understand the psychological tactics that had been used on me. One of the hardest things to confront was my own role in what had happened. Yes, I had been manipulated and exploited, but I had also made choices along the way. I had ignored red flags, pushed aside the concerns of loved ones, and even participated in recruiting others into the group. The guilt and shame associated with these realizations were overwhelming at times. My therapist helped me understand that guilt, while natural, wasn't necessarily productive. "You're not responsible for the actions of those who manipulated you," she would remind me gently. "What matters now is how you choose to move forward." Moving forward, however, was easier said than done. The world often felt like a minefield of triggers. A certain smell might remind me of the incense used in group rituals. A phrase overheard in passing could sound eerily like something Dr. M would say. There were nights when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I was back in that isolation room. Gradually, with the help of therapy and various coping techniques, I began to develop tools to manage these triggers. Mindfulness meditation, ironically something the group had twisted for its own purposes, became a powerful tool for grounding myself in the present moment. Journaling helped me process my thoughts and emotions, providing a safe outlet for the confusion and anger I often felt. As the months passed, I began to reconnect with my own spirituality, separate from the dogma of the group. This was a delicate process, fraught with the fear of falling into another trap. But I came to realize that my spiritual beliefs were an important part of who I was, and denying them entirely would be another form of allowing the group to control me. I explored different philosophies and practices, always with a critical eye and a healthy dose of skepticism. I learned to trust my own intuition again, to question and analyze rather than blindly accept. This journey led me to a more personal, nuanced understanding of spirituality that felt authentic and empowering. One of the most challenging aspects of recovery was dealing with the legal aftermath of my involvement with the group. As the investigation into Dr. M and his inner circle progressed, I found myself having to recount my experiences to lawyers and law enforcement officials. Each retelling brought a fresh wave of emotions, forcing me to relive some of the darkest moments of my life. The decision to testify against Dr. M, if it came to that, was one of the hardest I've ever had to make. The fear of retaliation was real, as was the guilt over potentially incriminating people I had once considered close friends. But ultimately, I knew it was the right thing to do. If my testimony could prevent others from going through what I had, it would be worth the emotional toll. As news of the investigation became public, I faced a new challenge: media attention. Journalists began reaching out, seeking interviews and statements. The thought of having my story splashed across headlines was terrifying, but I also saw it as an opportunity to raise awareness about the dangers of manipulative groups. With the guidance of my therapist and a supportive professor who had experience in media relations, I carefully navigated these requests. I chose to give a single, in-depth interview to a respected journalist known for her sensitive handling of difficult topics. The process was emotionally draining, but also cathartic in a way I hadn't expected. Seeing my story in print was a surreal experience. On one hand, it made everything feel more real, more final. On the other, it was like reading about someone else's life. The distance provided by the written word allowed me to view my experiences from a new perspective, reinforcing how far I'd come in my recovery. As I approached the 1-year mark of my escape from the group, I found myself reflecting deeply on the experience and its impact on my life. The person I was before joining the group seemed like a stranger to me now, naive and searching for easy answers. The person I became within the group was someone I barely recognized, a cautionary tale of how easily one's identity can be subsumed by a manipulative ideology. But who was I now? This question became central to my ongoing recovery and self-discovery. I was no longer the lost, insecure freshman looking for belonging, nor was I the fervent believer willing to sacrifice everything for a promised enlightenment. I was someone new, shaped by my experiences but not defined by them. I began to see my time in the group not just as a traumatic episode to be overcome, but as a profound, if painful, learning experience. It had taught me valuable lessons about critical thinking, about the importance of maintaining connections with loved ones, about the dangers of seeking easy answers to life's complex questions. More than anything, it had taught me about resilience. I had faced one of the most challenging experiences a person can go through, had my sense of self and reality fundamentally shaken, and yet here I was, still standing, still moving forward. As I look to the future, I'm filled with a mix of emotions. There's apprehension, certainly. The scars left by my experience are deep, and I know there will always be a part of me that remains vigilant, wary of manipulation and false promises. But there's also hope, and a newfound sense of purpose. I've decided to change my major, focusing on psychology with a particular interest in understanding cult dynamics and helping survivors. It's a path that will force me to continually confront my past, but also one that I hope will allow me to turn my painful experiences into something positive, to help others who have been through similar ordeals. I've also become involved in awareness campaigns, speaking at campus events about the warning signs of manipulative groups. It's not always easy to share my story, to make myself vulnerable in front of strangers. But each time I do, and I see the recognition in someone's eyes or receive a message from someone who sought help because of my talk, I'm reminded of why it's important. My relationships continue to evolve. Some friendships, strained by my time away and the difficulty of understanding my experiences, have faded. But others have deepened, strengthened by the trials we've been through together. My family, though still sometimes struggling to fully understand, has been a rock of support. I'm learning to forgive myself, to understand that vulnerability is not a weakness to be ashamed of, but a part of being human. I'm learning to trust again, both others and my own judgment, while maintaining a healthy skepticism. It's a delicate balance, but one that I'm getting better at with each passing day. As I write these final reflections, I'm struck by how far I've come, and yet how far I still have to go. Recovery isn't a destination but a journey, one that I'll likely be on for the rest of my life. There are still days when doubt creeps in, when the teachings of the group echo in my mind, when the trauma feels fresh and overwhelming. But there are also days of profound gratitude and hope. Gratitude for the second chance I've been given, for the people who stood by me, for the strength I found within myself. Hope for the future, for the possibility of using my experiences to help others, for the ongoing journey of self-discovery and growth. If there's one message I want to leave with anyone reading this, it's this: no matter how dark things seem, no matter how lost you feel, there is always hope. Healing is possible. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it is possible. Trust in your own resilience, reach out for help when you need it, and never stop questioning, learning, and growing. My story isn't over. In many ways, it feels like it's just beginning. But now, for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see where it leads. The future is uncertain, but it's mine to shape, and that alone is a victory worth celebrating.